hard times. We're being recorded, which is
Just
awesome.
got
We'll be able to pull this up in the future. And Taylor will assist us, and she'll be able to share with you all later where that's going to reside. I'm not a techie, so I can't help you there. But before we kind of get going and we get into it, many of you know that we lost a DeKalb firefighter a week or so ago. And Chief Troche is up in the Atlanta area at Roswell, city of Roswell. He's going to be one of our guests. So before we get going, the service is today at 2:00. I'd like to take a moment of silence to honor him. And so let's just take a quick moment. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I appreciate you allowing us to take time like this. We want to make sure that this is a real conversation. We talk about it's the largest coffee table, firehouse coffee table, dinner table, and we used to call it family time around the kitchen table. And so we want to kind of make it that way. We don't want to be. We're going to have some formal part of our presentations, but then towards the end, we're going to have a very open conversation. And as we get going, again, we want to kind of keep it informal, but we want to, rather than open it up to allow everybody to kind of raise or ask a question, if you could type your questions into the chat box, and then as we get to the point where we're ready to address those, Taylor will read those to us, and then we'll direct them to whoever needs to answer that question. Does that sound good? Dan, you got anything you want to add?
No, I said let's get going and let's get these guests giving us some good information.
Okay, so we want to talk about what about sleep? And I know that Sarah and Brittany and Dr. Billings have spent a lot of time doing some research, and they've got documentation, and we're really excited to hear about that. I know Roswell, Georgia, where Chief Troche is the fire chief, and he'll share a little bit in a bit as well. I know that they were doing some research on his fire department and some of the changes that they made there. So we'll give Sarah, Brittany, and Joel some time to share their information, and then we'll hit it up with the chief, and then the union president from Pasco County. They're getting ready to go to the 2472s. He is on duty today, so we'll try to get him on to make sure that he gets a chance to share about what they're doing there as well. So without further ado, I don't know which of you are going to take the lead, but it's yours.
So I know that Sarah's driving today, so I want Sarah to first be careful on the road and chime in whenever you can.
Writing, not driving.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. No, I can barely drive. That I'm not multitasking this.
Good job. I'm really, really impressed. So yeah, Sarah, I don't know if you want to kick us off and then talk a little bit about what we're working on with Joel, and then Joel can talk a little bit about his research, which is really like some of the cutting edge stuff. So I think that's probably what people want to hear about.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think sleep is something that and I admit freely, I underestimated the importance of sleep. Joel was an early adopter to the importance of this topic, and he was like, "What about sleep?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's important, but there's all these other things." And then I started doing more research into it, and I'm like, "Okay, once again, Sarah was wrong, Joel was right." And really, if you look at sleep and the impact it has on overall health and wellness, whether it's cancer risk, whether it's cardiovascular risk, mental health, it truly is, I believe, one of the big drivers of what we're seeing in the fire service across health and wellness. And I think we have to start looking at how we can make adjustments within the fire service that make sense. And one personal, we've got to talk to firefighters about the importance of their own sleep. We've got to get them starting to pay attention to it, tracking it, biohacking themselves. But I also think that what we can do from the leadership perspective is really start making organizational changes, policy changes, adjusting what we can when we can. Whether it's things, 10 years ago when people would ask about tactical napping, everyone would laugh. But the research out of that Daniel Patterson's doing really does suggest that napping in the afternoon, not an all afternoon nap because you don't want to hit a REM cycle, but that if your firefighters know they're going to be up in the afternoon, making sure that they do pay some attention to that, do a tactical nap, a caffeine nap where they have a little bit of caffeine, then nap, 20, 30 minutes and then wake up. So I think the conversation does need to shift. And I think it does need to be, it's something that I'm hearing more about and being asked more to present on podcasts, all those types of things than I ever have before. So I do think that this is kind of like the moment where we focus on this. In terms of organizational changes, and I actually am going to pass this over to Joel and our friends from Roswell, because I think we've done some data collection with them and found some really amazing things about how big the impact can be. We have a current study, two things that I'm going to plug. A current study where one aim is a national survey of sleep in the fire service, where we're asking about shift work, shift start times, and then looking at all sorts of physical and mental health outcomes. It's a national survey so we're just snowball sampling this. And I know Safety, Health, and Survival has sent it out before, but Taylor, could we get you to send it, because these people on the call are obviously really engaged. Get them to, could I get you to resend it to all the attendees to this so they can get their departments to take the survey?
Yes, ma'am. This afternoon they will all get it.
Oh, that's fantastic. We have about 3,000 responses to that already, which is amazing. But when you look at, there's 70 billion different versions of shift schedules. So we really want to get as broad of a sample as we can on this. We also really need, if you have any connections with the volunteer fire service, we need more volunteers. And we're specifically, after we survey the volunteers, are wanting to target their spouses. What's the impact? Because I think when we look at sleep in the fire service, we know, like from studies on miscarriage, that women and miscarriage is increased over for career firefighters, but doubling a risk. But volunteers are even higher. And on face validity, people have asked about that. I think it might be the interrupted sleep that's truly impacting that. So I think we might be underestimating some of these risks for volunteer firefighters related to reproductive health, but also cancer. And I just think, more research is needed, which is what we kind of just say all the time for job security. But I truly think that is a point here. The other part of that study is we're looking for, I think we have 2 spots left, looking for departments that are looking to change their shift start time. And I'd love for Joel to present a little bit on that paper. And maybe if you even want to, I'm putting Joel up for a second time in a week on the spot with some of his data. But do you want to share that? I would love for you to share the data that you had, the publication on start times and what kind of kicked that off as an issue. And then also I'd love for you to talk through what Roswell's done with the Roswell team, because it was really, they were early adopters of this, really cool stuff. It's awesome how they're using data to drive their day-to-day decision making. And also amazing to see, to see like the ability to use that on the daily to make arguments and to just think through ahead of time, like, hey, we're going to make a large change. What do we need to collect data on to know if it has an impact? So that the other aim of that study, if you know of any departments they're looking to change their start time, we have 2 slots open in that study. So let us know about that too. But Joel, is that okay if I hand that to you?
Yeah, just give me 2 minutes so I can pull up the presentation.
Oh, well, then I'll just keep talking.
That way I can share it too.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's and really some of Joel's early work. I don't think, when we first started talking about this, while I'm stalling for Joel to pull up the survey, when we first started talking about this, everyone wanted to know about what's the best shift schedule. Is it 24, 48, 48.96? Are there concerns with 48.96? Which I do have some concerns about 48.96. Anything where you're linking shifts, particularly if there's a chance that you have a lot of firefighters that'll be linking more than 48 hours, where that's where we see increases in a lot of poor health outcomes. The other thing that's interesting about the 48.96, and people hate my answer to this, because usually when I get asked this, it's firefighters going, hey, I hear it. And I'm like, nah. I think the one big, definitely more research is needed. But there was some research by Don Abbott out of Phoenix, Arizona, where he found that when you looked at Maydays, he was collecting Maydays nationally and just documenting what's happening. And he found like on a 48.96, the first 24 hours, like the split between first 12 and second 12 is pretty similar to what you'd see on like a 24/48 or a Berkeley or any of the other billion different approaches. But if you look, the like one piece of data that always has me, and more research is needed, but the one piece of data that he shared that in his tables that just really stopped me in my tracks was that last 12 hours of a 4896 had 62% of the Maydays that occurred on 48-hour shifts. So like significant, and if you think about like where your cognition is at the end of 48 hours, if you're awake for 24 hours, you have the functional and cognitive functioning of someone with a blood alcohol content of 0.10. So you're over the legal limit in terms of functioning. So I think those were the early conversations, and people are still looking at changing. A lot of conversation about 24/72, challenging with the expense of it. Portland is getting ready to publish. The scientists they work with is getting ready to publish on the Portland schedule, which is a 1323. But I really think the start time stuff might be kind of where it's something that you can change without cost, and I think it might really be one of the biggest influencers. You have that up.
I do.
Awesome. Well, then I'll shut up.
Okay, so here is what I think pretty cool results of taking something from a research perspective, meeting with the department back and forth quite a few times, and then them involved in the research to take it and apply it to their department, implement logistically a change, and then work with researchers to study that change and see if it's effective. In addition, after halfway through, we did some debriefings, found some areas for improvement, and then Roswell performed some changes, and then we just reassessed them. So we're working on the longitudinal data right now. But essentially, Roswell went from the 24/48 8 a.m. start time to the 48/96 11 a.m. start time. And so they changed July 7th and of last year. And so before that, we went in and measured wrist actigraphy, so objective sleep data, and then compared that before and then about 3 months after that change to the 48/96. And how this started originally was looking at day by day sleep with some participants that we had on a previous study. So I know this chart is a little bit tricky to understand, but the red squares at the top are in bedtime. So the time on average firefighters went to sleep. And in general, this stays pretty much consistent across days. And that ties back to the sleep medicine and circadian science literature that people typically go to bed around the same time each night. What changes is influences based on your alarm clock of what time you wake up, and so that's these triangles down here, and that's your sleep offset time, times that firefighters woke up on each day within this 24-hour 24/48 shift schedule. So here's the work, home the first day, and then the second day going into that morning. And so when we look at sleep day by day or really night by night, we could see a pretty interesting pattern. Obviously, when they are at home, they sleep some more, get some recovery sleep. And then that quote unquote Sunday night, so the sleep right before they start a new tour, was their least amount of sleep for this particular department, which was surprising for us. We had thought that at home they would have pretty good sleep and not at least not the least amount of sleep in total. And then same thing at work, which you would expect with calls, that's going to reduce sleep duration. But what we found was looking at the sleep and wake times is that shortened sleep was basically due to them waking up early and to commute in to work. So it was about an hour and a half. This department had a shift start time at 7 a.m. So that really started that question on the shift start time. And when this department switched to the 48/96, this isn't Roswell's data. This is Stillwater, Oklahoma. We saw the same exact relationship. So that Sunday night, same shortened sleep due to them waking up early to commute in to that 7 a.m. Official start time. So obviously the unofficial start time is 6 to 7 usually, and so firefighters woke up pretty early. Same thing after the 48 hours, waking up to go home. Again, they woke up pretty early, finish up paperwork, and then be relieved by the oncoming crew. This is what the first 3 days is what we may consider baseline for the firefighters, and on general they woke up around 7:30. So again, the sleep onset, what time they went to bed, stayed pretty much consistent. The only thing that changed is really what time they woke up in the morning, which was dictated by the shift start time. So the question is, from a scientific standpoint, is whatever's happening on these first 3 days at home, what if we were allowed to, or they were allowed to sleep in until 7:30 every single day throughout their tour? What would that do to sleep duration, and then more importantly, sleep pattern? And sleep pattern, having a consistent sleep pattern is the number one recommendation in sleep medicine and circadian science for optimum health and sleep health. So what would that look like what would we need to do for shift start time to be able to do this? So if we use this as a baseline, 7:30, add that hour and a half for commute, and saying that there's no difference in traffic or rush hour, that would push that shift start time to 9 o'clock for that particular department. And so on this one, we could see a potential increase in sleep opportunity if we delayed that shift start time so that they wake up refreshed. Reduce risk for motor vehicle accidents, because basically they were waking up sleep deprived, commuting in sleep deprived, and then subsequently we measured alertness on those days following commute, very poor alertness, which we could use that sort of as a proxy to performance or increase in risk in injury and accident. So that was the concern on that part, that we actually were able to document that in the data. So for Roswell Fire Department, they had at the time of the study 48 firefighters, and then 43 of them participated. And then from that, we had 33 that completed the baseline, and then 14 of those that completed the follow-up. This was right after the hurricane, so we lost a few that couldn't complete the objective sleep data from the follow-up study, but then we reassessed that here just last month. So we'll get a little bit more data. I know this looks terrible numbers, but 33% participation rate is pretty standard in our field. So the overall, let me jump back to the summary of the findings. The goods is that what we found was sleep pattern normalized after they switched to the 11 a.m. start time from the 8 a.m. start time. Overall sleep improved at home that Sunday night before, and both the time in bed and then the wake up time stayed consistent. And so that was pretty cool from a standpoint of looking at the research, is what we had here on the 24-48. Very similar relationship to what Stillwater had. Least amount of sleep that night before. And remember, this was 8 a.m. start time. So 6.1 hours, and that's well below the National Sleep Foundation recommended hours between 7 and 9. To what we have here, which is really cool in terms of data. So sleep time in bed stayed pretty much consistent, which we would expect. And then sleep offset stayed very consistent now with the delayed shift start time. So that essentially means that they have now a normal sleep pattern. That Sunday night now increased quite a bit, about an hour, and that may not seem like a lot to you, or to someone that may not appreciate that extra hour, but that's an hour every tour, and so that will add up significantly when we think about the cumulative effects of sleep loss. Now, you'll see here on shift, of course, depending on calls, they're going to have some truncated sleep. And this is where the debriefing occurred within the department to figure out why firefighters are still waking up pretty early and maybe not leveraging that 11 a.m. Start time or wake up time. And so they had some part-time staff that came in at 8 a.m., apparatus paperwork that was due early in the morning, replacement of staff that had to occur in the early morning, maintenance, any maintenance that came by usually started around that time. So what they were able to do was shift some of those items later in the morning to allow firefighters basically to leverage more of that opportunity. We haven't analyzed that data yet. We just ended the survey last Friday. So we're looking forward to see if this increases a bit. But overall, I mean, this is pretty cool results from a start to finish of a department taking research, coming up with an implementation plan, working with researchers, and then studying that effect, changing some behaviors or organizational policies, and then reassessing it to see if sleep improved and then overall health. We're also looking at the chronic effect of this schedule change with some annual medical evaluation data as well. So that's all pending. I think that's a good summary so far.
That's awesome. Brittany, are you going to add anything to that, or? And I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and then we'll get to them either. I see Brittany's been answering some, and I know Taylor's going to be monitoring those as well. We don't want to miss your questions. We're going to do our best to get all of them answered.
Yeah, excellent. No, I don't have anything to add. That was awesome, Joel. And Sarah mentioned that we have a study ongoing, and so I made sure to send Taylor two of our newest flyers that kind of explain a little bit more about that. We can talk about that as well. But yeah, I'll turn it back to you and see maybe what questions we have in the chat for Joel and Sarah, and go from there.
Awesome, Taylor. I don't have those up right now.
Oh, if you don't mind, let me also, because I think I saw a comment on call volume. Yeah, the one of the main concerns for departments that going to the 4896 is call volume, and so a really busy call volume at night, at least in the individual level, maybe that's at some point you're not going to sleep, and that's obviously bad. For Roswell, they had what I'd probably consider a more manageable call volume at night. On the 2448, let me pull up the data. Average was 1.7 calls during the day. And then, let's see, what was at night? 1.3. And then on the 4896, similar, 1.3. So very, very manageable in that case. Of course, that's on average, so maybe some stations are a little bit higher than the others. But overall, that's pretty good.
And Joel, in the data that you were discussing, did the department make changes to both their shift start time? I think you mentioned they changed from an 8 a.m. start to 11 a.m. start. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
And did they also change their shift schedule or only their time?
They did both. So two
They did
interventions
both.
at once. Yep.
So will you repeat again what they changed from to?
Yep. From the 2448 at 8 a.m. to the 4896 at 11 a.m.
Thank you.
I saw the question placed in here about the full-time firefighter who has part-time jobs, particularly with other departments. And I don't want you to feel like we are ignoring your question, Brent, but I do know that that is one of the hardball questions that Chief Schmidt plans to throw out. So we will get to that, I promise.
I just had a question, and I'm not even sure who maybe this should go to. I feel like organically, and I know there's more research that needs to be done, but as Sarah mentioned early on, I've been, as a chief, a pretty big proponent of examining times, regardless of whatever type of schedule that you work. I know that I was looking into that at a previous department that I was with. I've spoken to folks that work in departments that have what many might consider unusual start times for a 24-hour shift. Like, we know that there are departments that start at noon. We just heard about one that started at 11 a.m. I know of departments that start their shifts at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. in the evening, right? And for me, like, organically, it seems like there's a lot of value to replicating as much as you can your sort of your home environment and your off-duty life with your work life, right? getting up in the morning just as anybody else would that works a regular day shift, having the day, going in, having dinner at home, perhaps, then going into work, starting it in the evening and using that evening as, not so much downtime, but, um, you come in and you do your truck checks and you do your normal, uh, routine for the evening. But then, like anybody else, even though you're at work, you barring calls, you go to sleep. And then when you get up in the morning, you get up again in the morning at the firehouse and you start your workday. And then at the end of that workday, you go home at the end of the day again, right? And you've worked a 24-hour shift. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but you worked your 24-hour shift, but you've added a lot more of that replication of like your regular everyday life into that shift, like a person would that works an 8 to 5 or a 9 to 5 job. The question though, and I know that this is going to be hard to answer, and I know that we need to work on this sort of thing, is I'm more curious about the cultural barriers or implications when we start to come out with these results of these studies, and how we're going to work towards convincing fire departments, fire chiefs, and certainly firefighters that, you know, this is probably, a better way to do it. I know that the two things we hate the most are change and staying the same, but we've got to find a way that to sell the folks once the research is solid enough to do that, right? And so I think we need to have some discussion about that too, and maybe draw on some of the ways we've convinced people to change in the past in other areas of health and wellness. So that's my kind of bit so far on this.
Hey, Dan, and John, are you good with me jumping in on that? Because you just segued
Yeah.
into something. So the city of Roswell unquestionably had to break some cultures, right? And to your point, Dan, let me start by saying that when we read the research and the material that was being produced by Joel, Sara, Matthew Walker with the Why We Sleep book and all that, leadership has an obligation and a duty to act on that information. You cannot ignore that. There's no plausible deniability. I think
Agreed.
Sara said something very important earlier. I think we're taking the culture of we think and we're making it we know. Because what Joel, Sara, and some of the others are doing is they're providing us the I know the impact. So now, as leadership, we can't ignore the facts. The facts are being presented to us. So what we did here at Roswell is we took the approach of having bringing basically everybody in for face-to-face conversation. This is not something that's going to take place where you're going to make such a culture shift and you're just going to send everybody an email and say, read this research. So what we did is we brought town hall meetings in, we communicated with everyone. We took surveys of what their thoughts were. But in short and brief, what I would say is this: the 2448 to a 4896 really wasn't an obstacle. Not as big of an obstacle as I would have thought. The change in start time was the obstacle. That was such a change. And I can answer a few questions here just as it pertains to us that have been already brought up. And we'll start with part-time because we're experts in part-time at Roswell. At one point, I had over 200 operational staff members that were part-time from metro departments spanning all over metro Atlanta. And one of the questions that came up there in the town halls is, hey, Chief, if we go to this 4896 with a change in start time, this is going to impact my part-time jobs and the other things that I'm involved in. My answer to that, and I'll say it here, and I don't take it lightly, but it's just my answer is I have a duty and a responsibility to take care of you and do what I can control here. I can't control what you do when you leave here. I'm trying to make it better for you when you leave here. But I can't control the speed you drive your car when you leave here. But I could definitely set things in place to say, I'm going to control your speed while you're here. So the 4896 and the alternative start time for us of 11 a.m. was to provide them measures based on science, based on research that I know I'm going to improve their lives. It's that simple. I know it can get complex as far as the culture, how people receive it, the debate. But at the end of the day, Sarah, Joel, science is bringing us information that unless you got your ears shut and your eyes closed, it's hard to ignore that we need to make some changes, and leadership needs to be bold enough to say, I have to protect you against yourself sometimes. And if that's the case, then that's just something that leadership, I think, has to have a super courageous conversation with staff,
Sure.
the membership, and try to convey that and bring the facts to the table. And through that approach, we were able to bridge the gaps of some of the fabricated thoughts of what we thought, and we met it with, well, we know, here's the science, you can't dispute it. And little by little, you saw the acceptance take place. And I can tell you in the metro Atlanta area, since we've been able to do this, and we're super excited for what Joel's bringing, because we want to see what happens with things like cortisol levels, testosterone, glucose, blood pressure. These are all things that we're going to see what the impact is. And when we're able to bring that, the metro area has already, everybody started changing their schedules. So sometimes you're just a catalyst to needed change, and somebody has to be bold enough to do it and step forward. And hopefully this leads to global change, because I could tell you almost 3 decades, I wish I would have had someone look out for me and my family of 4 kids, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do Christmas, 15 years, because the start time and all that. So I just absolutely have to give a tremendous amount of credit to those that are leading the way and providing us the information we need, the facts that we need to turn the I think into the we know. And I would definitely highly recommend to, one, be bold, be actionable, and you have a duty to act on that as leadership. And secondly, use the data. Nobody can dispute it.
That's great feedback, and I think, and I'm looking at the notes and the comments as well, and I think that, the other part of that too is not just on the human side, but I mean, fire departments, some of them have pretty rigid, schedules as far as the way they like to do things when certain things occur on a shift and this and that, and we have to realize that, like, that's not the only way it needs to be done. We have to account for things like training and so forth and so on. I mean, there's no reason why, along with changing a shift start time, for example, that we can't modify some of the other ways that we do things, and maybe we find new and better ways to do that stuff too. So yeah, I appreciate the insight. I often think the same thing about when I was back working at 24/48 and in a very busy department, and thinking I never even why do I have to be here at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning? I'm going to be here for 24 hours anyway. Even then I was thinking that in my head, but moreover, I'm not sleeping anyway. I mean, I literally would work a whole shift and not even walk into the bunk room because it was that busy sometimes during peak seasons and so forth in a resort area. So um the EMS component, if you're an EMS department as well, whether you run medic units or BLS, or whether you do first responder service or whatever, the call volume there is another impact. Like, some companies are busier than others, so forth and so on. There's a lot to consider, I think, from department to department, that the chiefs and the firefighters need to work through for what works best for them. In other words, the bones of it is, this is when we're going to start working a shift, but there's nuances to each department that they have to work through that may be different for other departments, because of call volume and things like that. So, I mean, we were even told we were pulled off of units after 12 hours of a shift, because we had some folks that had enough foresight to realize that we were already getting beat into the ground and we still had a half shift to go. Do things like that occur too, right? Side by side with the changes. So there's a lot of little things, a lot of subsets of this to consider. But the point is, the science is starting to show us why we need to do things like this. So
Yeah, Dan, you raise a good point, and it's worth mentioning. A lot of what I get hit with on a constant is, my department's too busy. We can't do that. Let me tell you what we did, and I'll kind of close out with this, but I think it's super important to note. I think the onus of your organization's response is on you, that data collection. I know what Joel mentioned it earlier, what the average is. I take it upon myself to go, well, is that an average? Is that a 90th percentile? Where are the call volumes happening? What are the stations that are busy? What is my relief factor when we do have an exceptionally busy tour? Did I create a relief factor for the 4896 to support those stations that are extremely busy being able to rotate and get relief? The answers to all of those is yes. Where's my call concurrency happening? So I think the onus on the organization to make sure they understand how their organization operates, what the data for that organization is, and can you put a program like this into place? We got to take some responsibility on that. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, but Sarah, Joel, all these people that are doing the research for us, we can't just, they're giving us the science to sleep, the impact that it's having, and they're trying to do everything they can, but I don't think that removes us from being responsible for our organization, looking at the data in our organization. And you may be too busy. I can't answer that for you. It took us a very long time to figure out here at Roswell. As far as the alternative start time, I'll tell you what we did is we took the address of every single member in this organization that is on shift, and we actually ran the research from their home address to make a determination on what the most optimal start time was for us based on commute. So we originally started with 10 o'clock. The data said 11 a.m. was the most optimal time for us to start based on all the addresses. So nobody was excluded. So again, there is an onus on us as an organization to dive a little bit deeper and not just be relying on someone to come give us the answer per se. So the partnership is critical. Obviously, the partnership is critical, but we did have to do a lot of homework for some of the questions that come up. Our department's too busy, our station's too busy. What about the part-time jobs? What about the commute? So there was definitely some work internally that had to be done to shore some of that up. Personalize it, I guess I would say, to personalize it to the city of Roswell and not just globally say it's working somewhere else, so it has to work for us.
That's awesome. You guys are bringing up some great information. I want to allow Dixon Phillips, he's the union president for 4420 in Pasco County. They're getting ready to go to 2472s. But I want him to kind of lean in a little bit on the culture and some of the impacts and some of the things that they are looking at and considering as they move forward. And then we'll start hitting some of the questions after. But I want to make sure Dixon gets a chance because he is on duty. Thanks, Dixon.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for the introduction. Sorry I'm late. We just got back from a call. But it's talking about so here in Pasco County in fiscal year 24, we executed our CBA to move to 2472s to begin on January 25th of 2026. And there were a lot of factors that played into that, before we were on a 6-week Kelly Day cycle, so a 53-hour work week. And we could not retain and we could not recruit. So that was kind of the factor that pushed the department and the county to listen to the 2472 argument. So I just run through some numbers, and then this will kind of point to that culture shift that we had here in Pasco. So from fiscal year 22 and 23, we lost 162 firefighters, cost the county $4.7 million. Our overtime in fiscal year 22 cost the county $6 million. We had 84,000 hours of overtime. In 23, we had 79,000 hours of overtime. And then in fiscal year 24, which was the first year of our executed contract, the overtime number cut in half to 41,000 hours. And that was just because of the recruitment and retention, the issues that we had solved. So there was a lot of hesitation in the membership at that time. We're talking about something new, something that nobody else in the state of Florida, at least a department that was our size, was doing. Obviously we had Boynton Beach and Boca that took that 2472 schedule well before us. But the one thing that I would say is when we talk about the Kelly Day work cycle, particularly, right, whether it's a 3-week or a 6-week, you lose that crew continuity. On a 3-week work cycle, majority of the shifts, you're gonna be missing one person from your crew, versus on getting rid of the Kelly Day, reducing the work week by either a 4896 or a 2472. You don't have any members of your crew that are off unless it's a PTO or a sick leave. It's been an extremely good benefit for us here. We have recruited an unbelievable amount of experience and seniority. More than 50% of our new hire classes for the last year and a half have been firefighter paramedics, which is something, you know, that's a premium down here in Florida. And that's something that we were never able to get into the door. We've had 32 people leave in this year. Of those 32, 26 of them, they did not pass their probation year, or didn't make it out of orientation. You know, the other 6 were people that moved out of state. So where we lost 162 firefighters in 2 years, we don't have that issue anymore. The culture here is improved. We're actually going through the station bid process right now, and everybody is more than excited to begin our D shift, in January of 25. So I missed the beginning, so I don't know questions or if what I said was off base of what the conversation was before, but just wanted to kind of give you all the numbers and the reason why we kind of made that transition.
Hey, Dixon, real quick, what schedule were you guys originally on?
We had a 6-week Kelly day that came in 2019, and before we were on a 56-hour work week, so no Kelly day.
Okay.
We wanted to make sure we kind of addressed at least the 2 most common, actually 3 most common shifts: the 24/48, the 48/96, and now, which seems to be taking getting some energy, is the 24/72s, which is and I would have loved to have the 24/72s back in the day, but which leads me to my big pressing question. I know it was asked as well, and it can be a little bit sensitive, but Chief Troche hit it. Dixon really didn't touch on it, but being the union president, this is an important conversation. Is and going back to the science and the research, our jobs on our days off. I had a lawn business for a lot of years. I know a lot of firefighters that they worked in the hospital in the ER as nurses or as paramedics, or whatever that other job might be. What is that impact when we change these shifts to the sleep? Because it comes to me, it's the sleep deprivation versus sleep disorder. And do they work together? Do they cause each other? Is one a cause of the other? The extra work, the extras that we're doing on our days off when it's supposed to be recovery. I often, when I do presentations, a lot of times I talk about professional athletes, comparing industrial athletes, which are firefighters, to professional athletes. Professional sports team, if I'm the owner of that sports team, I want every single one of my players available and ready to go. And I do whatever I can to make sure I take away all their distractions. I make sure that they're fit, they're healthy, they're eating right, they're getting good sleep, all that. Even when I played in college, same thing in college. I had curfews the night before a game, and we had to eat certain times together as a team. All of those things to make us better. So where the differences in the fire service, and Chief Troche kind of touched on it a little bit, but he was talking more about what he could control. Now he's got the 48 hours that he can control. The 96, he's indirectly controlling it a little bit, but not directly. So I want to go ahead and open that up and kind of bring that up, because I know I've seen that question kind of come up as well, about the working on your days off, that impact, and the impact and difference between deprivation of sleep and sleep disorders.
Well, a few things. One, yes, I think that you can develop disordered sleep. About 37.2% of the fire service has a sleep disorder. About 80% of those are undiagnosed. So one of the low-hanging fruit things that we can do for the fire service is start having people screen for sleep disorders and get them treated. Absolutely. I also think, we're seeing things like insomnia and nightmares related to mental health, and kind of with sleep and mental health, like it's a chicken and an egg thing, right? Like there's not a psychiatric disorder that isn't linked to sleep in one way or the other. In terms of the second job issue, yes, studies between us, other groups, we document about 42 to 48% of firefighters nationally have a second job. And I think we need to acknowledge that. We need to talk about it. But we also, as we talk through the health implications of this, and this is where I think the education on, people are going to make their own choices. And let's be honest, there are people who are just going to be assholes about it and, expect that you'll do what they want. You'll do what they want.
and there are those, like, some people we just can't fix the world for, right? But I think we have to focus on who can we do the most good for. I also think that what we're starting to see a trend in data is the younger firefighters are not working second jobs. They're actually liking this whole work-life balance thing. Working 10 days a month actually seems like a pretty sweet gig, and the other 20 they want to spend with family and doing other things. So I think we're going to see some generational differences in this moving forward. And I also think when it comes to prioritizing this, I think someone posted in the comments, we need to think about it like SCBA use, which I think is just fucking brilliant, because that was something that 20 years ago, everyone thought, no, we're never going to be able to get people to use SCBAs consistently. And now, like, there are places, we're at a point in the culture shift where there are places where they still don't do it. You still see it. But for the most part, we've gotten over the hump there. You know, we got more than 50%. And I always think through to like the tipping point. You're going to have your early adopters. You got that next, that 6.5% on the end. You got about 15% that are kind of the tipping point folks. And then once you get past that, it becomes widespread. If you look historically in the fire service, how we think about things like cancer, smoking is my favorite example. Because if you look at use of cigarettes in the fire service, rates are lower than the military, lower than the general population. Like, we were blowing the goals of public health out of the water when it comes to cigarette use in the fire service. When you track back historically, rates were higher than the general population. So I think it wasn't the topic of study, but it was like something that they controlled for Joel, Brittany, someone smarter than me. Covariate. Thank you. And so you can trace back to those studies 30 and 40 years ago that were there. The rates were just off the chart. It was so ingrained in the culture. And I think what we're seeing with sleep and what we should be messaging about sleep is that, like, sleep, we need to make sleep and cigarettes similar. Because if you look at the overall, like, relative risks of some of this stuff, it is, like, I don't think we're really overstating it, particularly because it has implications beyond just cancer. And I think as we start to talk about, like, this is not something that is with no consequence. This is not something that has, well, I'll just sleep when I'm dead. Yeah, you actually will die sooner if you don't sleep enough. Like, if you're short sleeping, in particular, under 6 hours a night. And I think we have to I think a lot of it's going to be around the shifting is going to be around the messaging of that, really helping people understand, like, the significant impact. But now rates are so low in the fire service of cigarette use that when we trace that back to what it was, some of it was policy stuff. So the policies around, like, changing shift start times, all those types of stuff. Some of it was the education, though. And some of it just became the peer pressure. Like, when we did our early work about 18 years ago on focus groups, and we asked people in the room about, like, so what about cigarette use in the fire service? Like, the shit that the one smoker in the room got was off the charts. And I think we're going to start seeing that. And I'm hoping we will. We're going to manifest this. I think what we'll see in the fire service is the conversation on sleep and prioritizing your sleep, instead of it being a badge of honor, is going to become, don't be a fucking idiot. Like, we need to do you got to do what you got to do, because we know rates of cancer, cardiovascular risk on the fire, and all those things are higher, and we just have to start. I think as we take organizational responsibility, which is what I think what we saw with cigarette use, the policies, the procedures, and those types of things, then I think a lot of times that kind of personal responsibility falls in with that. And they do happen, and somewhat simultaneously and play on each other. But, the union, I have talked a ton with the folks up in DC about sleep. I mean, everyone is now talking about this issue. We just have to figure out the messaging. We'll get there, though. Like, this is awesome. This is culture change. Safety, Health, and Survival just celebrated 20 years of a birthday. Like, look at all the changes that has happened. This is just the next thing we need to focus on. I'll put my soapbox away.
I don't know. I think on a very pedestrian level, I think that the opportunity to work only 10 days, or in the case of a 24/72, 8 days a month, on average, it bodes well for folks that still just feel like they need to or want to go work a part-time job every now and then and still get better sleep and still take care of themselves better, especially coupled with a different shift start time that works better. not that I'm a proponent of working part-time jobs, but if that's the argument, then geez, you're going to get more days off. So, uh,
Dan, I got to tell you, echoing some of what Sarah said and you
yeah,
just said, I agree. We're seeing a big difference with some of our younger people that are coming in, actually
sure.
wanting some of that work-life integration or balance where they're really enjoying it and not trying to fill it with something else.
Mhm.
Something worth mentioning in here too, as far as culture goes. Now, let me just qualify and say this, it was a non-scientific part of what we did, but we did get a clinical group, a mental health clinical group, which actually included a retired Navy SEAL to do a separate non-scientific survey-based research that included spouses and children of age that could respond to the survey as to life changes that would take place at home when we did this switch. Things like, is intimacy increasing or decreasing? Is your spouse more present when they're at home? Are they all these different things that are things that we want to know from a humanistic standpoint? What's happening at home? Not just what's happening at the department, and what's happening physiologically to the firefighter, but what's happening when they get home. And we saw significant positive increases on things like intimacy, being more present, less stressed out, less aggravated and agitated. So we saw a lot of positive markers that increased from the survey. And of course, there's the outliers of some people that live very far away. And the leave time is like, well, I got a shorter day when they arrive, and that's creating some stress. But the overarching message from the spouses and the children were, hey, my parent is more present and they are less stressed and they are less agitated. So even from, again, a non-scientific research within our organization to say that we put clinicians that can actually look at this information and get as close as possible to reality of what impact is this having in their homes, it was very positive. So now you got science on this side that's giving us all this information. On the other side, we know that it's impacting them positively at home. It's just hard for me to imagine why anyone would not be paying attention to we can change people's lives.
And I think this is such a great conversation. And I want to share that Chief Kerwood has developed a fatigue policy in his department in Hutto, Texas. And I think that's huge in helping shift that culture. Sarah mentioned it, Chief Trosh mentioned it. Um, you know, change is slow over time, but a lot of it is like putting it into policies and procedures and starting these things like changing a shift schedule or changing your shift start time. But Joel mentioned in his presentation as well, it's not just those things, it's ensuring that the policies and procedures match up with changing those things. So like if you change your start time, also ensure that there's not things that are going on in the morning that are waking firefighters up anyway, even though you're changed the start time to allow them in theory to get more sleep, and yet they're still waking up early. So I think it goes back to ensuring that the policies and procedures kind of match up with what you're wanting to do organizationally. And Chief Kerwood mentioned that he would be happy to share his fatigue policy with anyone that is interested.
I would love to see that policy. And Brittany, you mentioned something so important. I'm going to give you an example of an unintended consequence when we switch a schedule. PR details at the schools. They all want them at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if we switch to 11 a.m. start time, am I going to wake them up at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock to get there at 8 o'clock to do the schools? That was an impact point that we had to address. We can't say we want to safeguard you and start at 11, but we're going to wake you up at 7 o'clock for PR details. So there's definitely some unintended consequences that come. The fatigue level is another great point. We have policies around it. Then there's accountability that has to be put around that to safeguard them. But there's definitely some unintended consequences that we're going to have to shift how we do business. Otherwise, it's counterintuitive to the change. The buzzer going off for a radio check every morning at 7 a.m. We can't do that if they're supposed to be sleeping. So there's definitely some unintended consequences that we did not think of, and we had to pivot very quickly to address those.
Awesome. This is a great conversation, and this is exactly how I think we anticipated this going. We still have about 30 minutes or so, so I want to make sure we get as many questions as we possibly can, and I'm sure that our guests will elaborate a little bit. So I'm going to ask Taylor if she can kind of go through the questions and address the questions to whoever seems appropriate.
I can go ahead and read some of the questions. I will say that our researchers, our fearless leaders, have done a great job of trying to interact with questions in the chat. But just for the sake of everybody hearing the conversation, I'll go ahead and go back to them. So research specific to busier departments, so they're fire and EMS providers, and have 15 to 25 or more runs per apparatus. Is there any research specific to them in regards to sleep?
So I pasted a few different studies that looked at call volume in general, but for in regards to like objective sleep, my FEMA early career FEMA grant right now is looking exactly at that. So everything call related. So that's going to be like the frequency of calls at the individual level, the duration of those calls, the timing when they occur at night, and then the type of call and how that impacts sleep at work, and then how firefighters recover at home. That is with Tulsa Fire Department, a very department that has some stations that are, essentially they don't get any calls at night. And then to the busy stations that have 20 plus calls throughout the 24-hour period. They are on the 24/48 schedule, but we're right now collecting data. I think we're in round 5. So hopefully well, I don't know by when, but we'll have some answers to look at call dispersion and how that impacts sleep to further this conversation. I want to pivot just a little bit before you get to the next question, because that kind of relates back to the 24/72 and how that is often framed as a health and safety perspective, but also some of it arguments are reframing it to a 42-hour work week perspective. So there's a couple of questions or perspectives on that. If it is health and safety related, we don't see much conversation of what's happening on shift that is promoting a 72-hour off shift period. So that's kind of the point of the FEMA study that we're doing right now, is looking at everything call related, because maybe it's a question on labor. So is there enough units to disperse those calls, enough stations within a jurisdiction, or enough personnel so that we have a quote unquote ideal number of workload for the personnel? Otherwise, if it is more on that 42-hour work week of having some more time off, I wonder how often we'll see departments go to maybe a 48/144 schedule. And in fact, some departments have already transitioned to that particular schedule. So any of the 3 platoon schedules you could duplicate with the 4 platoon schedule. So it'd be interesting to see how this turns out with the growing number of departments that do transition to the 24/48. But overall, for the calls, we're looking into it. So stay tuned. We'll have some data shortly.
I know that we just discussed the impact to their personal lives and actually how these shifts are showing positive impacts to their personal lives. There was a question about the divorce rate specifically. Again, it was addressed in the chat, but just for everybody. And shout out to Dr. Jahnke saying that the divorce rate is actually lower for men who are firefighters than the rest of the population, because I think that will shock everybody else as much as it shocked me.
Yeah, we actually double checked those results and triple checked them because I didn't think it was accurate. But we actually been able to replicate it with a couple other ones. But for women in the fire service, divorce rates are not, you're screwed. But for men in the fire service, they're actually lower than the general population, which is fascinating. But not necessarily with the data that we do have coming in from the survey that's open right now. We should be able to do kind of like a macro level look at that. But we'll look. That's an empirical question. Oh, I did want to add one other thing in terms of like getting people to shift and like changing the conversation about it. I highly recommend that that we start talking to firefighters about biohacking themselves. I've seen a lot of benefit from like personally and just out talking to people about if you were tracking your own health, like sleep trackers, those types of things. Firefighters can get really excited about that. And I think that as people see we're starting to, unlike even cancer studies, like giving PFAS levels back immediately, because I think once people see stuff that's more specific to them and they see themselves in the data, the faster they'll make changes. So I highly recommended that. I've had some departments ask, like, oh, everyone wants a Garmin watch. Garmin actually isn't one of the better ones that's commercially available, but as you give them the information and teach them how to change, that can be helpful.
Wonderful. Are there any active or planned studies involving the use of supplements as it relates to sleep, specifically magnesium, zinc, B6, creatine, etc.?
None that I'm aware of right now. I think for that right now, we're leaning on any of the kind of the general science literature on that. But I'm not aware. There are a couple supplements that are being looked at right now in the fire service, but it's more related to cancer. Like there's a broccoli extract, one that's being looked at in terms of it's supposed to have some mechanistic improvements for firefighters, but I'm not aware of anything on sleep. So I think for that, we gotta go general pop.
Special shout out to one of our participants, Nick Cook, who says Kirk Parsley has great information on these supplements. So everybody should go look there.
Perfect.
Is there any available data on the physical construction of bunk rooms or the areas that volunteer career firefighters are sleeping in terms of blackout curtains, sound insulation, airflow, etc.?
Yes, Kelly, you want to talk about that? I know you recently presented on that.
Yeah, we'll presenting on that on Sunday at the Fire Station Design Symposium. So not that I've seen any specific research within the fire service, though in the comment I mentioned that if you have multiple people using, say, an individual sleeping room, then one person's preference may be completely different than another's. And so having something where you can set up and basically addressing the five senses except for taste. So light, noise, sound, temperature, and privacy, comfort. So like think of like the mattress. Having that to be able to be customized is going to be the ideal, so that someone can set that up to their ideal setting. There's a couple departments that have, believe it or not, invested in sleep numbers, and so that's a significant investment. But again, you're able to adjust it to your setting. Yeah, I think the last presentation I did with the station design, I always ask, oh, who has the oldest mattress? And the last time shattered all records. That oldest mattress. For those that are here, think about what you think your oldest mattress in the department is. Add it to the chat if you think that you topped this one. But it was 1980. And so I said, that is 45 years old.
Oof.
That thing's probably tripled in weight or
That's
quadrupled.
disgusting.
It's probably made out of asbestos. And then from
Oh.
actually an interesting perspective, I don't, maybe it has carcinogens built into it, or from sweating and whatnot. So there's some significant improvements that can be made to some departments. So if you beat 45 years, let me know.
Hey, Joel, I'm happy to tell you we're not even close, but
Good.
Such a great topic. When we started looking at the sleep here at Roswell, one of the things that we did, and I'm sure this may resonate with other departments, because everybody knows that the fire department's just bountiful with money. So we had to take a look at, we got to support this. So instead of these huge lump sums and being reactive to mattress replacement, we put a mattress replacement program in place based on research of, hey, what is the national standard for mattress replacements and all that? So we're not getting caught with the, hey, these mattresses are 20 years old or 30 years old. So we put a mattress replacement program in to make sure that we're fitting into that. And we're actually in the process of putting up a couple of fire stations here, replacing or moving fire stations. And Joel, to your point, we put a tremendous amount of work in the senses, like you discussed, and the building of the interior of that fire station to include, and I'm just throwing it out there, don't come after me, but for instance, the rooms are designed for sleep, not for play and sleep, it's for sleep. So we designed the area with the colors, the lighting, and the room spaces to support when you go into that room, you're there to sleep, and individualized temperature settings, which we know is probably the number one argument at the firehouse. Is it too hot or too cold? So each room has is an independent unit so they can adjust the temperature to suit them for good sleep. So I think there's a lot of information out there on what we can do with everything that's being discussed here on making these stations more suitable for especially a 48-hour tour that's longer, and also to accommodate some of the sleep work we're doing, because you kind of defeat the purpose if you're sleeping on a 40-year-old mattress and you're trying to do all this other stuff. It's a great point to bring that up, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and there are low-hanging fruit. So if you are, trying to just simple stuff like tin foil or aluminum foil on the windows can block out sun. Do a little bit more blackout curtains, and then there are sealed track blinds that are sort of the top of the line. So there are from low to the greatest thing ever if you're building or designing a whole new station. So there are lots of steps that you could do to improve the sleeping quarters.
Thank you, Joel. So the next one is, has anybody looked at or worked with neurofeedback/EMG providers? They have seen some information from neurofeedback providers that first responders do not have good alpha brainwave levels, which are what calms your mind and allows you to sleep deeply.
So there's some new research planned. We're working with, and it's actually fire and EMS. We're starting with NREMT, project looking at brain functioning with the life study at the Ohio State. And I don't know why it's called the Ohio State, but so that's new. And they have a statewide study, and they're going to start recruiting specifically first responders for that. So to be able to kind of understand, there's a couple really cool technologies out that are making some footholds in DoD. They have a ton of funding compared to first responder groups. And honestly, law enforcement has a ton of funding compared to fire, but there are technologies out there where you wear a band and it can actually help alter your sleep, and it can help alter your overall attention. So there's a lot, I think, on the horizon. 10 years from now, we'll be having a very different conversation about this. We'll just plug in our masks and be good. But more research is needed, but I am cautiously optimistic that it's coming. And I do, Taylor, just real quick, wanted to comment on Jack Sullivan's comment about volunteers.
That
We
was the
don't
next
know.
question. Look at you
Then
read
I'll
my mind.
Okay, then I'll shut up. I just wanted to make sure we touched on that, because I'm with you. We do not know. And I think that this is a significant issue for volunteers. I think that, when I talk to volunteers anecdotally, I'm hearing, it's not 10 days a month, it's 365 days a year that I have shitty sleep and my family has shitty sleep. The survey that we have, because we have that in our study and then Joel has it in his, we have to get volunteer. I don't know how to get more volunteers to do the survey, but any help you can give us on that would be amazing, because we don't know. And my belief on what we're going to see is it's really bad, but we don't have the data because we're struggling to get people to respond. And I get it, like volunteers, like shit, you've got 5 jobs and then you're volunteering is another 6 job on top of it. But is this topic in particular, I think we really need to get volunteer engagement on.
Yeah,
Please and thank you.
And the National Volunteer Survey asks a lot about perspectives, and especially from the family unit. So there's a whole family section to that. And then my study focuses specifically on the objective sleep. So we'll look at sleep throughout the week and see how calls impact that in addition to their primary employment if they're also working. So two angles to try to tackle at least a very big first step into volunteer firefighters and how they experience sleep.
Just so y'all know, the thought on that, somebody just dropped in the chat, was getting you all together with VCOS, our Volunteer and Combination Officer section, so that you can present during their conference in Florida in November. So I can help make that connection.
I
Go
just
for it.
want to add one more comment to that. I've been following with Jack's comment, and I've known him for a million years too, and otherwise very locally. But I think from somebody that came from a very strong volunteering background, I'm going to just share my own personal feelings that, the traditional volunteer model itself really doesn't work anymore. If you think about the days, at least back when I started, where we had a pager and the thing went off and you got up out of bed in the middle of the night and drove like crazy to the firehouse to get on a truck and go to a fire alarm type of a system really is not designed for today's generations and the obligations that people have. I feel like as much as we talk about sleep, when we cross over into that kind of a model, we've also got to be looking at what are we asking these folks to do? And a lot of it comes back to other things that volunteer fire departments traditionally ask of their volunteers. They're constantly being asked to do fundraising activities and go to meetings and do all the pub ed stuff that career fire departments do while they're on shift. They're running calls that probably could be handled by even in a small combination department. A single engine, can go to a wires down call, for example, and keep people from having to get up out of bed to do that if the station is staffed, along with stipend programs and the like, where you're asking volunteers to spend a shift day or night or whatever at the station. And then when they're not doing that and not signed up for something like that, that they're essentially quote unquote off duty, unless there's, the big one, they have the all call tone or whatever it is that notifies everybody when there's a working fire. We have to look at uh, changing the sort of the mentality of what we expect volunteers to do, because as Sarah said, they're working several jobs, they have families, they have other obligations, and they have non-emergency obligations that their own fire departments put on them as well, outside of staffing the apparatus and all the existing training and new training that they have to have. So it's a lot bigger, a lot more complex issue to deal with than just addressing a career fire department that has a certain staffing model and a certain shift coverage, and then we can just make a couple changes to that and make it better for everybody, right? So that's a very deep and complex question that probably needs a lot more time than we have in this arena here today. But speaking from coming from that, and I know Jack is he's saying exactly right, because like we know that's how we grew up in the fire service. We barely ever slept ever, because we kept getting up in the middle. There was no organization of staffing or crew stuff like that unless we did it ourselves, the overnight shifts and things like that. So there's ways around that to, I think, that the volunteers deserve to allow them to focus more time on their own families and their health and still do what they can do to support the volunteer organization. And I'll shut up now with my soapbox.
I mean, the last question we have, I believe, from going through the chat, because we had a couple questions that hit to the same things. So I think the last question we have is, would you all recommend, because as Dr. Jahnke pointed out, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink. Although I think we all know many horses that are going to fight you tooth and nail being led there in the first place. Would you recommend department policies limiting volunteering with another department, having another job, doing some of those things to try to force them to prioritize rest when they're off?
I'll chime in on that. So like I said earlier, the Roswell Fire Department, before we started our transition, was made up of over 200 members that worked here part-time and staffed all of our frontline apparatus. There was 0 full-time members. So imagine the elite of all the metro area coming here and working on their days off. So we were actually aiding, I guess I could say, or contributing to the fact of these fatigue levels. Since the research and everything came out and we started making these changes, our approach has been, instead of a blanket policy that says you will not, members are required to submit a application for secondary employment for us to evaluate. Obviously, we're sensitive to it, because if the metro area was to take the same approach to say, you will not work any part-time job, we would have lost our entire workforce. So instead of a blanket approach to there are no second jobs or anything like that, talking to the membership, and it's actually in city policy, they just need to submit it. It needs to be reviewed. That way the decision could be made by the person and not as an umbrella. So I don't know if that helps, but that was our approach, and it's been successful because nobody feels like they are not being seen or heard as an individual for their specific needs, as opposed to just a big blanket umbrella that says everyone gets a no.
I think to tag on to that, one of the biggest things that's missing is the education. You know, everyone on this call this morning, you're at least a little bit educated into the concerns of sleep and health and safety of our firefighters. But to drill that all the way down, I do a lot of work with the University of Miami and their research on cancer. And that's one of the conversations that I continue to bring back to them is we've got to do a better job of educating the entire industry, not just the chiefs, not just the captains, but the entry level firefighters. We need to do it in the academies. I think that we need to do a better job of sharing with them why, in this particular case, sleep is important, there's many impacts. This isn't just about going to bed. This isn't just going to bed at 10 o'clock and getting up at 7. There's a lot of other factors that play into this. It's restful sleep. It's not just laying in bed with your eyes shut. I don't want to simplify it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I'm not trying to pretend to be. I'm trying to look at it from a very easy perspective, a perspective of firefighters. And I want to, I think that we owe it to them to be able to educate them. The researchers are doing fabulous work, and it's impressive work. I'm one of those weird guys where I'll read abstracts. And fortunately, I've got a few researchers on my phone. I can call them up and say, hey, what does that mean? Because I'll read it 14 times and not understand it. But we've got to be able to take that research information and make it practical to the firefighters so that they understand why is Pasco County going to 24/72s. It's more than just that work hours. There's more to it than that. Why did Roswell go to 24 or 4896? Again, there's a lot of factors that go into this. And I have to go back to say, when Roswell went to this, I had the privilege of speaking at FRI last year, and I shared information about what Roswell was doing. What impressed me was not going to the 4896. What impressed me was the research behind the scenes that they did, putting in all of their firefighters' addresses to see what the commute time is in the Atlanta metro area. The less wear and tear on their vehicles, the less chance of getting in a crash, the more time at home. All of those things are important. So that's what was impressive to me, is that this chief staff took that into account, and that's very important. But they had to educate their members why we're going to 4896, particularly when there's a lot of conversations about 24/72s. That's a big conversation here in Florida, is they're going to 24/72s, because the 4896 doesn't get that 42-hour work week. So I think all of this research information is what we've got to put together in some type of educational platform and take it to our members, put it in the academies, put it in our orientation programs, so that they understand that this is not to try to control them, but this is so that they have a long, healthy career, and what more importantly, a long and healthier retirement. Sorry.
John, I think you're spot on. It's worth mentioning, the vulnerability and openness to have the conversation, and you have to answer the what. There's 100% you got to answer the why. And if the membership, if our team feels like they're being seen, they're being heard, and this is a conversation, we care. It's just that simple. We care enough to do this. It's not like you said, we're not superimposing. We're not trying. It'd be interesting to do a research study on how much sleep chiefs are getting these days with everything going on. We're trying to take care of people. And if that's genuine, we answer the why, We tell them, look, you're being seen, you're being heard, you're being prioritized, and we provide that information. It's going to have an impact. Sara mentioned something earlier that I think is important too. I think stock went up in some of these widget companies like the Aura Ring and everything when we started doing what we were doing here at Roswell, because even if the intent is to disprove something, people pursued their own data. I'm going to get iWatch, Aura Ring. I'm going to get something that's going to inform me. And I'll tell you overwhelmingly, it didn't take long for people to start coming back and go, oh my God, I'm not sleeping. My heart rate during rest is elevated, and I'm only getting X amount of hours of REM sleep. They started educating themselves. We have a very smart, passionate group of people that we can empower, provide the why, give them the care, and some of them are going to take it on their own, and they may provide us research that we haven't even thought about yet. But they empowered themselves. A lot of them got their own devices and started reporting back and actually saying, hey, yes, you're right. My REM sleep is down and I'm not getting enough sleep and all these different things. So kudos to you for what you said, John. I agree 100%. And just know that they're getting the devices and doing it themselves and self-checking some of this stuff from our organization here and coming back with their own feedback too. That's basically aligning with what Joel, Sara, and the science is telling us. They're proving it themselves with their own devices.
I agree, and that's awesome. And you know, when the firefighters at the lowest level, they buy in, and then they start sharing, that gets everyone to buy in versus the chiefs setting out a policy, because there's always going to be some resistance when a chief sends out policy. So, well, I appreciate everyone being on. We want to go ahead and wrap it up. We have just a few minutes left. What I would like to do first is allow our guests to kind of give us a 1-minute summary, maybe give us a little bit of insight into the future. And then we have a couple quick little announcements for the next meeting and such. And so let's go ahead and let's start with Joel, if you want to go first, and then we'll hit Sara and Brittany, and then let's do Dixon because I know he's on duty, and then Chief Troche will have you finish up.
Sure. So I guess I'll end with sleep is, John, as you mentioned, sort of not a passive thing where you just, lay your head down. It's a very much, we could think about it as a proactive or an active process that starts well before you going into to bed. And so if we could start to develop a pre-bed routine where we start to eliminate, lights and bright lights, like the dentist style lights of 5 or 6,000 temperature to maybe a soft white. Think of the old incandescents. That's going to help, get your mind set into that pre-bed routine. Sleep interventions can happen at various levels. So this research is going to go into the updating the 2007 IEFC sleep deprivation report. So we're having a second edition. That's going to be the main output for the FEMA grant, and it'll have some guidance at all 5 levels. So the chief administrative level, the health and safety or wellness coordinator, whatever the department uses for that particular term, company level officer. So that's sort of like the station parent, maybe encouraging the firefighter that plays video games till 3 in the morning not to do so. The individual firefighter, so everything really comes down to the individual. And then the 5th one is the home dynamic. So those interventions can span across all 5 of those. And that's going to be in the updated second edition. So more stuff coming out. We have lots of stuff coming out. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Brittany or Sara?
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Chief. I think Sara might have dropped off. She texted that her service was starting to get a bit spotty, so I can do our sum up. I know that Taylor's going to send out a couple of flyers, so a lot of you have been asking about what research exists, and as we always say, it's a little bit of job security that we say more research is needed, but the real answer is very much that more research is needed. Sleep has been understudied, and Sara mentioned it. I think a lot of us kind of put sleep off, oh, it's not that big of a deal. There's so many other things we need to focus on. I think we are collectively amazed at how many things sleep impacts when you really start looking at sleep deprivation and sleep debt. So Joel has a current FEMA funded study, and he talked a little bit about that. We also have a current FEMA funded study that is looking at a couple things. One is a national survey to kind of take a look at what is going on. I know there's a discussion about volunteer firefighters, and there's not a lot we know. Again, more research necessary. So Taylor's going to send out some information on a national survey that we're doing. Please, please push that out, not only to your career counterparts, but also to your volunteer counterparts. It's so important to get their perspective on how their sleep is disrupted, and as well as their family life and other things, so that we know a bit more about, okay, like what do we know? So how do we figure out what interventions or sleep hygiene habits might work for volunteer firefighters? So the survey is one, and the other thing is we are still looking for departments to enroll in our study. We are looking for folks who are changing their shift start time. We're not looking at shift schedule changes at this point. We're super interested in hearing about folks who have changed their shift schedule in the survey form, but we're also looking at departments who are changing their start time. And so that'll involve surveys before the change occurs, as well as some biomonitoring. So we're probably going to use Whoop bands to look at biometrics prior to changing the start time. Then after they change the start time, we'll do more surveys, look at daily sleep and how that changes, as well as biometrics through the Whoop band. And so, and then we'll do a 1-year follow-up, as well as qualitative interviews with folks to find out, like, what did you think? Did you hate it? Did you love it? Do you hate Whoop bands? Do you love Whoop bands? I love that Chief Troche mentioned people getting more involved in finding out like their metrics and what does that mean for me. And I agree. Once I started wearing my watch, I am so excited to look at like what my REM sleep looks like, what my deep sleep looks like. It also changed my outlook on drinking. I'm like, oh, like having a few drinks before bed, not that big of a deal. And then I'm like, oh my God, it really does impact my sleep. So yeah, lots going on, but definitely check those out. And I know Taylor will send out more information. We have a couple informational flyers. Feel free to share those, and please reach out to me if you have any questions. But thank you for including us today.
Awesome. President Phillips.
Thank you, Chief. First, I want to say thank you again for having me on. I apologize for jumping on pretty late. But so just some things that we're looking towards in the future. So our D-shift implementation is scheduled for January 25th, 2026. So we're excited to kind of keep you up to date on how that's going, moving forward. The one thing that we're also looking towards is re-implementing fitness standards. It's like the one thing it's like the black sheep of the fire service, right? No one wants to talk about fitness standards, but we all know that physical health directly ties to your mental health and also sleep. So, it's important for our firefighters to be physically and mentally healthy. To talk about the second job, conversation that came up a few minutes ago. So we do the same thing that Roswell does, where the employee, the member, has to submit an application for approval of their secondary employment. Obviously we encourage our members not to have secondary employment because we know the importance of sleep and recovery, but that ties into directly. And this is from, I have my labor hat on. So from the labor standpoint, but, in ensuring that our firefighters, our members, and your firefighters are earning an honest living wage, right? That is definitely the importance. If you have members and firefighters that when their check hits, they're automatically in the negative, what is that going to do to their sleep? They have a responsibility to provide for their family. And unfortunately, some people, whether it's their own mistakes or just the fact of where they work, they might be required to work a second job, based on the family dynamics. So that's pretty much what I have. We are also looking, Chief Troche, if you could help me, how did you plot your members, drive time from their home to their stations? And, was there a certain website or an app that you use to get that data? Because that is something that we just started having a conversation about a month ago. So we are looking to hopefully change our start time next year. So that's all I got. Thank you once again for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you. Chief Troche, you're up.
All right. I'll answer the question, and then I'll be very brief and close. Basically, simplistic. Google Maps. You could use a metric. We did it in a spreadsheet, of course, and we entered into Google Maps to all the addresses because it has the analysis previous, right? So we're able to analyze real time through Google, and If you send me your email on here, I'll send you an exact spreadsheet, how it broke it all down, but we just put the addresses in and kind of analyze it that way. As far as closing, what I'll say, and I'll split this into two. Number one is I couldn't be prouder of the fact that we're even having these conversations. I couldn't imagine these conversations taking place 25 years ago, because they weren't. Mental health, physical fitness, sleep. So from an overarching umbrella of the fire service today, that we're able to have these conversations just blows my mind. 25 years ago, you just get beat to death. You hope you make it to the age of retirement, then you move on. So kudos to the entire group, and kudos to all the scientists and researchers and the people that are out there doing the work to get us the information we need to be educated and make good decisions. And on the other side of it, to the whole entire group, keep pushing chiefs, researchers, keep pushing everyone to make change. That's what we're doing, is we're just shattering ceilings on cultural norms that happened because they just existed. And couldn't be prouder of a profession that now has evolved to a place where we can say why, and you respectfully get an answer instead of, because this is the way it is, just do it. So it's just super exciting to be in a time where we can have these conversations and share information, collaborate, and change the trajectory, as opposed to just meet everything with a no why answer. So just thank you to the entire group, and thank you for Joel, Brittany, Sarah, and everybody else that's aiding in this effort. You're making a tremendous impact.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone being on the call. As we wrap up the discussion about sleep, we're just starting, and this is a good, I think, a good starting point. There's obviously, we've heard that there's a lot of impacts with sleep and how it affects us. So we know this will continue, but this is a great starting point and great information to begin with. Obviously, having our partners on, doctors Sara and Brittany and Joel, that's awesome. We like to, and one of the things Dan and I want to do is we want to make sure it's still relevant. So we want to have our firefighters represented. So thanks to Chief Troche and Dixon Phillips for being on today, and kind of sharing their perspective. And again, it's just the perspective. It's everyone's going to do something a little bit different across the country, and that's why we want to give you opportunity to ask questions. And as we wrap up, I just want to share our next session is scheduled for October 16 at 11. If you want to put it on your calendars and get it ready, we'll do the same thing over again. You'll have to register, and or Taylor may have a way that's already, you're going to get that information. I'm not sure. I'm not a techie. And then I want to share about some conferences coming up. If you're in the Florida area, we have our Safety and Health Conference in Orlando, October 19th through 22nd. We try to get very real. I'm on that steering committee. We have some really good speakers coming. It's a 2.5-day event, and it's focused solely on health and safety of our firefighters, from sleep to cancer to wellness, mental wellness, and mental health. So we try to hit as much as we can. And then, of course, and I apologize, Brittany. When is the conference in November? What's the date?
The 3rd through the 5th.
Okay, in November. It's in Loveland, Colorado. That's a great time to be in Colorado. So if you can get out to Colorado, that's an awesome conference as well. So as we wrap it up, I just want to thank you all very much for participating and being here. I would encourage you to invite some folks next time to participate. I love your questions. They're great questions. I know we may not have gotten to all of your questions, but we do appreciate your participation, and thank you so much. Until October 16th, you all have a great and safe couple weeks. Thank you so much.